Inside America's Boardrooms, the informational show for board members and corporate secretaries. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.
Welcome to this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. I'm TK Kerstetter, the CEO of Boardroom Resources and the co-founder and editor-at-large of Corporate Board Member magazine. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the show. We are going to be talking about getting real value from board assessments. And joining me are two people that spend a good deal of their career time thinking these things through. First of all, to my immediate right is Paul DeNicola, who's the Managing Director of PwC's Governance Insight Center. Welcome back, Paul.
Thanks for having me, TK.
And to his right is George Anderson, who's a leader of Board Effectiveness Services at Spencer Stuart. Welcome, George.
Good to be here.
So, gentlemen, the topic is board assessments, and your firms sort of got together and had a publication called Beyond Check the Box, Getting Real Value from Board Assessments. And it wasn't like you just leapt into this topic. This is something that you guys have been building research. And Paul, I'm going to start with you and PwC's annual corporate director survey. You always have a couple questions in there related to board assessments. And was this what helped form the foundation and then gave you the incentive for you guys to get together and dig a little deeper?
Well, there are a couple of factors that I think drove us to do this. The first is in our survey, we ask a question every year. We've been asking it for, 6 or 7 years now, on whether or not, as a director, you believe someone on your board should be replaced. And this year we had a record response to that number.
Yeah.
46% of directors said they believe that someone on their board should be replaced, and more than 1 in 5 said 2 or more of their directors should be replaced. So, that was one set of data points that said, well, there seems to be an issue when it comes to director assessment of their peers' performance. We also asked a little bit about how directors view the actual assessment process, and we got some information there too. Only 43% of directors believe that their annual assessment is very effective. They also told us that a majority of them view the assessment process as somewhat of a check-the-box exercise. And a fair number said they have a hard time being frank in their self-assessment. So I think some of those things, at least from our side, said, hey, we should work on a piece that talks about how to take this to the next level.
So I'm wondering if you made it sound like a good thing, that it's a record. In some ways you could make it as a good thing because people are more aware about the contributions that people need to be making at the board level. But at the same time, if you're an investor, an institutional investor, I'm sure you're not going to get excited that boards aren't following through on refreshment and replacing directors.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the that 46% number, and then you look at the turnover statistics that Spencer Stuart has from their board index, there can be somewhat of a disconnect between how many board seats are turning over every year and how many directors say that there's a problem, at least 1 or 2 problem board seats on their respective boards.
So George, like PwC, Spencer Stuart has done board research for a long time with its Spencer Stuart Board Index. You too dig into this issue of board assessment. Share, what you brought to the table relative of your research and what built the foundation even stronger.
Yeah, and thanks, TK. And you're familiar with the Board Index, and I'm sure some of the folks watching are as well. We, every year, track developments in the boardrooms of the S&P 500. And we've been doing this for about 32 years. And the advantage of a long-term study like this is that we can see patterns emerge, shifts and changes, whether that's in board composition or, in this case, changes in board assessment practices. And what was remarkable last year, we saw the usual, virtually all S&P 500 boards do some form of annual self-assessment. Last year, 54% conducted that assessment at the level of the full board and the committee, and 33% conducted that assessment at the level of the full board, the committee, and the individual director. And on this last point, on the individual director, that was the biggest change we've seen in this area in many years, in the sense that if you went back 10 years ago, only about 15% of boards were providing any kind of individual director feedback at all, and now we're up to 33%. So this has been over time quite a shift for the boards, and one of the things that motivated the report that we wrote with PwC.
Yeah. Well, I can't back this statement up statistically, but in my 30 years experience of working with boards, the only real tool in my mind that changes behavior in the boardroom is the individual director peer-to-peer type of evaluation. So, you hear investors, you hear people like me and others really pushing sort of the limits, and it's not every board's ready for that. Some need to work their way up to that, but do you guys share that view that that's an important piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, we're seeing more and more of our clients do this as part of our work with them when the board is conducting a self-assessment. They're adding this component. And interestingly, we're hearing from directors that they like it, they value it. Directors don't have a lot of mechanisms for getting feedback on how they're doing. And for the most part, they're welcoming it and saying it's really useful to hear where my contributions are highly valued, and if there's anything I could do to be more effective, I'm very open to hearing that. So while it can be new for some boards, it also can be rewarding and productive for many of them.
Yeah, same.
Yeah, I guess my sense is that as very successful executives, for most of their lives, they were evaluated individually and given feedback individually. And my sense is it's probably good practice to consider doing that on a more regular basis. Yeah.
My worry is that those that say that they like the experience are the same people, sort of like preaching to the choir. They're the same ones that go to conferences. They're the same ones that want to be an effective director, and work at it. And then the ones that don't like it are, might be that group that doesn't make a big effort. So. Well, in a second here, we're going to tell people where they can get the full review of this, but I wanted to ask you guys, because we always like to leave some good, hard tips for our viewing audience. So I was going to ask you guys to sort of pick one thing that sort of came out of your joint paper that you think is a great guideline or tip for boards as far as board assessments go. And George, I'll start with you.
Sure. One of the things we talk about in the paper is the idea of changing the end game. And essentially what we mean by that is for the board to shift its thinking from the self-assessment is something that we have to endure or get through. It's a kind of a check the box. To shift from thinking that way to thinking about the assessment as an opportunity to actually make the board better. And for our clients who are doing that, they're doing a couple things generally that seem to work pretty well. The first is they're just taking a fresh look at the assessment. If the form they've been using isn't providing a lot of value, change it. Engage in some conversation about it, engage a third party, take other steps, but you don't have to stick with a process that's not valuable. The second thing they're doing is getting some early buy-in. So typically a member of the board, maybe the nominating and governance committee chair or the lead independent director, is taking some ownership and leadership of this process. That person can go and talk to the board members and say what's working well in our self-assessment and how could it be better, and then be prepared to incorporate that feedback. And the third thing that seems to work pretty well is to commit to take some kind of action as a result of this. We've gone through the process, we want to do something with what we learned from it. And that can be part of what the lead director or nominating governance committee chair builds through this process of collecting feedback.
Well, that is the magic beans in this whole thing is people are doing the evaluations, but they're not actively acting upon the information that they're getting.
So then the question then becomes, how do you make sure that action gets put into place? And I think there are some practical things that we identify in the paper that boards can do. I mean, one is committing the time to it, right? And that is making sure that there's sufficient time on the board agenda for that follow-up. Another would be making sure that you've clearly identified who's going to lead that follow-up. Now that could be the board chair, lead director, could be chair of NomGov, could be someone else on the board, but having someone with a clear responsibility to, one, set the goals for the changes that need to be made, two, sort of track progress along those goals, and then three, report back to the board as to what changes, in terms of where they are on the continuum of putting those changes into place. And then finally, I think a key action that can be taken as a result of the assessment is making the link into the overall strategic board succession process. That is, the assessment shouldn't be an end in and of itself, but the assessment should feed into your overall board succession as you look at your board composition over a longer period of time.
Well, how can people get a copy, the full copy? Because I know I've had a chance to look at it, and it's well worth spending time on. So, how can they get a copy?
So for us, you can get it very easily on pwc.com/Governance Insight Center.
You can find the Spencer Stuart Board Index and this report on our website, spencerstuart.com.
Well, George, Paul, thank you for joining me today and having the opportunity to share with our audience about your new release. Again, that's Beyond Check the Box, Getting Real Value from Board Assessments. So thanks again for joining us. And that will conclude this edition of Inside America's Boardrooms. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week when we take another look at a critical topic that will help you be a better board member or committee member. So we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for Inside America's Boardrooms. Brought to you with Knowledge Partners, Diligent, PwC, Center for Audit Quality, the Conference Board, and Corporate Board Member. Along with content contributors Equilar, Meridian Compensation Partners, Wilson Sonsini Goodrich and Rosati, Donnelly Financial Solutions, and the Society for Corporate Governance.